Welcome to Education 615 Module 3. Today we're going to be talking about knowledge-based lessons and cross-cutting instructional strategies that you learned about in chapters 5 and 6. One thing I want to start right off with is the beginning of the chapter 5. It was really implied by Marzano that teachers always have to introduce content. But we know from several instructional models that have been research-based, for example, the 5E model, the teacher facilitates an experience where the students actually are introduced to the content through the experience instead of a direct instruction lecture model or any of the models in the chapter that were talked about in direct instruction. So it's not always that the teacher has to present, and it seemed implied there. So just understand that I don't necessarily agree with that, and there are models out there. Honestly, for example, the inquiry-based lesson model that was presented in that chapter could easily be facilitated where the teacher doesn't present the content until the students present it, and then the students could actually, if there was a problem, that's where the teacher steps in. Okay, so another thing I wanted to talk to you about are these knowledge application lessons. At the beginning of this module, one of the introduction, I started talking about, and I know that you all know this, there are several teachers that just try to shy away from these types of things because honestly, sometimes they can be a management problem. So for initial licensure courses, I always tell my brand new teachers that, you don't want to start a knowledge application lesson on day 2 in your class. You don't want to start small groups on day 2 in your class. Why is that? Because really, you're going to want to somehow get procedures in place. So you're going to slowly put piece by piece together of these things. I'm pretty sure you already know that. I just want to make sure that we realize that this wouldn't be, the first week of school with these knowledge application lessons, and that the complexity in some of these instructional models can make it difficult for your students unless you have some sort of structured procedure that students know they need to go through. And then by the end of the year, though, they're innovating. They're doing things that you never thought they could do. And for example, this picture here, I just put this picture here because this was a flower dissection model that started a unit, right? A flower dissection lesson that started the unit. The students were taught how to do these small group working together to do investigations, and the teacher didn't present any content. The students were fiddling about trying to figure out what's going on with all these different parts in the flower. They didn't know the names of it, but they were able to describe it and predict what they thought it was, and then the teacher starts going in and attaching vocabulary to that. So that is one way that you can do these knowledge application lessons. Okay, so let's keep going. So a couple things I wanted to mention past the text is, when you're reading these, a lot of them seem to maybe feel like they were for a specific content area. And you're probably right. They were probably, like, for example, the inquiry-based model probably came from science. Actually, there are several that definitely came from different researchers that were looking at science instruction. But even something like the invention model, which you think, oh, it's definitely science, in my class, I remember using the invention model across several different content areas. And you can use the invention model straight and just have your students invent something if you're an English teacher, and then have them write about it or write about their process. And these can be like how-to, explanatory writings, but that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm saying, you could actually have that and just be a creative, think creatively about that invention instructional model that they shared, and say, you know what, I could really use this in my English class. I really want them to do to write a meaningful paper, why not, every writing is an invention. Why not take this model and see how it works with, writing something about either a problem they had at a restaurant or a place of business, or just something that happened that was awesome, and give them criteria to stick to, have them share it at the end, like the steps in the text told you to do, or sketched out. That would be a very great model for an English classroom. So don't get stuck and skim over those parts. I want you to really think creatively as a teacher, since you've been teaching, for a while. Think about how you could possibly use these instructional strategies innovatively in your classroom. And those are going to be the ones that are like, people are like, oh my gosh, what in the world are you doing in there? And your students are saying the same thing. This is really cool. I haven't done this type of thing. So, and I didn't expect this from my English teacher, my theater teacher, or whoever it might be. So just keep that in mind while you're reading, I implore you. All right. So the other thing I wanted to mention is, I'm going to stick with this invention model since we were just talking about it. Just about every one of these instructional strategies that was shared in chapter 5 really have their own content specific instructional model. Just the invention model, has tons of them, and I only listed several off the top of my head that I've read in the research recently. But design-based modeling instruction, I actually used that for my dissertation. It's very similar to what was here. It's just slightly different. They didn't have the steps the way that they had it here. And there are differences in what is highly effective and what isn't so effective. So that depending on what you're doing, you might want to choose one or the other. Engineering design-based instruction, project-based. Some people would just say that we could do that with project-based instruction, and same with problem-based. We could do something like this invention, and the problem is we need to have something invented for that. So there are several different ways that you can think about these, and you should be making those connections. Like, oh, I saw that in the last professional development session we had in September. Whatever it might be, just think about what connections you can make. And of course, honestly, if you're going to do the invention model and you're teaching math, science, or anything in the STEM area, you should definitely talk about engineering design process, because that is definitely in the literature right now as something super important. Okay, so let's get going into what do we do with all this. Now that we've read it, we're getting creative with it, we're innovating, we're thinking about how we can put this into our instruction, even though it doesn't look like it's a typical theater-based lesson or something I would use for my special education students. But we're gonna, be innovative with it, right? So the best place to do that is in that unit plan. So when you're thinking about chapter 5, I really would love for you to take some content area model that is either from chapter 5 or maybe you were led to it by chapter 5, or maybe it's something in your pedagogy portfolio that you've already looked at that sort of aligns with one of them in chapter 5. That is going to be the crux of your unit plan. I would really like it to be something student-centered, something meaningful to their lives, relevant to their lives, something that could even possibly get your students out in the community, that big, really meaningful lesson that just makes the year. So that's what this unit plan, I'm hoping you can really get into this. So just make sure that if you do not choose one from the knowledge, this chapter 5, definitely need to find one that's in your pedagogy portfolio. And even if you do choose something from chapter 5, you might want to go to the research and use one of the pieces from that for the portfolio, right? Because remember, I'm looking to see that you're using things that you looked and read about the research in that unit plan, okay? And then chapter 6, oh my gosh, there's so many things there. I'm sure you've used several of them in chapter 6, but it's super easy to just incorporate that as a small part of your unit plan, and 2 or 3 of the days, different little cross-cutting instructional strategies, because that'll work with any model like it's said in the chapter. And the other thing too is, if you have one that you know is a cross-cutting instructional piece that you love to use, put it in there, because one of the things I want us all to do is, when we're reviewing each other's, is notice the cool things that are in there that you didn't think of. Okay, so that's it for chapter or module 3.